Hello everybody. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 3 in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Nick has continued to do his observations and he sees that his neighbor is throwing parties all of the time. The parties are legendary, and in fact I'd like to read to you some of the descriptive language that Fitzgerald uses to describe one of these parties. At least once a fortnight, a corps of caterers came down with several hundred feet of canvas and enough colored lights to make a Christmas tree of Gatsby's enormous garden. On buffet tables, garnished with glistening hors d'oeuvre, spiced baked hams crowded against salads of harlequin designs and pastry pigs and turkeys bewitched to a dark gold. In the main hall, a bar with a real brass rail was set up and stocked with gins and liquors and with cordials, so long forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from the other. I think that's one of the reasons why I love this book so much, is because I think that Fitzgerald writes in a way that deserves to be read out loud. There's a certain poetry to his descriptions and so forth, and I just think they're awesome. Now, to that end, though, as beautiful as that language is, I do want you to think about whether or not Fitzgerald is actually endorsing these kinds of parties and lifestyles. As glamorous as they seem, there's a bit of an underbelly to it. So be paying attention to that divide that seems to exist there with the experiences that people have at these parties. The other really important symbol that gets brought out, we've talked about color a little bit, is that cars symbolize the wealth, the extravagance, and it's the 1920s. It's 1922 when this is set, so cars are still a relatively new thing, even though there are quite a few more affordable cars out there. But one car that's not affordable is a Rolls Royce, and even now in present day, it's going to cost you at least $500,000 to get this. So that's why it's crucial that the kind of car that Gatsby is driving is mentioned so explicitly, and there will be other reasons for that later on in the novel as well. The party that Nick does get invited to, he's been an observer as a neighbor, but he's actually invited to a party this time, goes over and it's just got this sort of rhythm to it. It's people are excited to be there. It sort of undulates and grows and moves and so forth. And then as the evening progresses, of course, people get more and more comfortable. The more that they drink, the more that they party together. Nick is seeing that rumors are again something that pervade these social spaces as one woman starts dancing and people talk about how the fact that she's involved with Gilda Gray, a famous dancer of the time, even though it's not true. And Nick also observes, hey, I think I might be actually the only person who's invited to this particular party. And that's seemingly a throwaway line, but it does underscore the difference in rules between East Egg and West Egg. You have East Egg, where the Tom and Daisy Buchanans live, and that's a place, though, where no one's crashing any parties over there. There are rules to follow and protocol and invitation and manners and that sort of thing. And West Egg, it seems to be just a free-for-all, at least at Gatsby's place, and people are doing really whatever they want, whenever they want. And this is kind of uncomfortable for Nick. He's not used to this raucousness. His saving grace is when he runs into Jordan Baker, who dined with him at the Buchanans in chapter 1. That introduction was made there. And one thing I didn't talk about when I did my lesson on chapter 1 was that Nick recognized her, not because they had ever met, but because she's a professional golfer and she's been featured in different magazines and news articles and so on and so forth. There's a little something in the back of his mind that makes him think that there was something that was sort of unsavory with her, but he can't put his finger on it and he sort of forgets about it and so forth. But at any rate, she's sort of a celebrity, and she's a celebrity here at this party, and people come up and talk to them, really her, and she says, I'll help you find Gatsby. And this makes sense because Fitzgerald laid it out for us in chapter 1 that she does know who Gatsby is. She's been to his parties before. So they wander about the mansion, and they wander into a room that is the library, where they encounter a character who is known only as Owl Eyes because of his glasses that make him look out. And he doesn't serve to advance the plot in any particular way, but his commentary and his ridiculousness as a drunken sort of fool who cannot believe that the books in the library are actually real offers an opportunity for the author of the book to sort of comment about this notion of there being a contrast between what is real and authentic and what is, again, a fantasy. And so he's pretty impressed that there's evidence to believe that this might actually be a genuine place. Well, Gatsby isn't there, so Nick and Jordan move on. And that is where, once they move outside, Nick is approached by a gentleman who comes up to talk to him and ask him how he's doing and so forth. And then they determine that the reason why this gentleman thinks that Nick is familiar is, hey, did you serve in the Great War? And yes, I did. And this infantry and that infantry. And then the gentleman asks Nick to go hang out with him. And Nick sort of has a weird moment until he realizes that this is Gatsby and that, you know, he's been asked by the person who invited him to the party. He showed up to the party he was invited to. Why wouldn't he continue to go do something social with him? And then Nick describes why Gatsby seems to be so sort of enchanting and hold this rock star status to people. And I'd like to read you that observation. He smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole external world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just so far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that, at your best, you hope to convey. Precisely at that point it vanished, and I was looking at an elegant young roughneck, a year or two over 30, whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. Sometime before he introduced himself, I'd got a strong impression that he was picking his words with care. Now, Nick doesn't make any claim about these observations. What is important is that he's noticed these character traits at this point in time, these idiosyncrasies. And so I want to make sure that you notice them too. After that experience and Gatsby goes off, of course, Nick is just grilling Jordan for intel, and she doesn't really know a whole lot about him because, you know, what's important about Gatsby? He's somebody who throws large parties, and she likes large parties. So that's all she really needs to know. As the merriment of the party draws to its inevitable conclusion, we see that that tone and that excitement and that fun has turned sour. Couples are arguing with each other, people don't want to go home, people are whining, people are upset. And as Nick is waiting to say his goodbyes and to apologize to Gatsby for not recognizing him earlier, and that's important in terms of telling us a little bit more about Nick's character and moral compass and what's important to him. He sees Jordan and Gatsby exiting from a room together, and she is clearly enthralled with the discussion that they have had, which is saying something because she's not somebody who's easily impressed. But the conclusion of this conversation is really about her giving him permission to call her to date. And so that tells us as readers that might be something to look forward to. And then Nick is able to talk to Gatsby, and then eventually Gatsby has to go away because he gets a phone call. It's late for his party. You as a reader should be thinking to yourself as you're reading critically, who is calling him and for what purpose? It's got to be 2 or 3 in the morning by the time this is happening, the plot that is, and so what business is it that's taking him away? And Nick's final observation in regard to the party is when he sees that there are 2 drunk people who have been involved in a 1-car accident where a wheel has fallen off. And even though, and of course Owl Eyes happens to be one of the 2 parties involved there, think about what Fitzgerald is doing here. Cars seem to be the ideal status symbol, and the drinking and lavish parties symbolize the fun, excess, and carefree attitude of the entire decade. But there is a dark side. We have two passengers, although they aren't hurt, they absolutely are representing this clueless and irresponsible sector of society, because neither party takes any responsibility for it. I thought we ran out of gas, says one of them, and I didn't even know the car had stopped. And, so they're really not paying attention, and it's going to lead to some dangerous consequences. Fitzgerald is building some tension here. The chapter proceeds, and Nick reflects and says, oh my gosh, I see that as I look back on this, I've spent a lot of time talking about this party, but that's not all I did all summer. I did a lot of these, and he mentions the mundane things. He talks about how he's an observer. He's sort of walking around fantasizing about, lives that he hasn't lived and so forth. And then he mentions finding Jordan again. And this also allows Fitzgerald to move us very swiftly through time, because now he says it's midsummer. So summer officially starts in June 20th-ish on the equinox, or not on the equinox, but on the first day of summer. And so we know it's got to be late June and getting into July when he's talking about this. And I would like to read to you this part as well. He says, for a while I lost sight of Jordan Baker, and then in midsummer I found her again. At first I was flattered to go places with her because she was a golf champion and everyone knew her name. Then it was something more. I wasn't actually in love, but I felt a sort of tender curiosity. The bored, haughty face that she turned to the world concealed something. Most affectations conceal something eventually, even though they don't in the beginning. And one day, I found what it was. When we were on a house party together up in Warwick, she left a borrowed car out in the rain with the top down, and then lied about it. And suddenly I remembered the story about her that had eluded me that night at Daisy's. At her first big golf tournament, there was a row that nearly reached the newspapers, a suggestion that she had moved her ball from a bad lie in the semifinal round. The thing approached the proportions of a scandal, then died away. A caddy retracted his statement, and the only other witness admitted that he might have been mistaken. The incident and the name had remained together in my mind. Jordan Baker instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men, and now I saw that this was because she felt safer on a plane where any divergence from a code would be thought impossible. She was incurably dishonest. She wasn't able to endure being at a disadvantage, and given this unwillingness, I suppose she had begun dealing in the subterfuges when she was very young in order to keep that cool, insolent smile turned to the world and yet satisfy the demands of her hard, jaunty body. It made no difference to me. Dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. I was casually sorry, and then I forgot. It was on that same house party that we had a curious conversation about driving a car. It started because she passed so close to some workmen that our fender flicked a button on one man's coat. You're a rotten driver, I protested. Either you ought to be more careful or you oughtn't to drive at all. I am careful. No, you're not. Well, other people are, she said lightly. What's that got to do with it? They'll keep out of my way, she insisted. It takes two to make an accident. Suppose you met somebody as careless as yourself. I hope I never will, she answered. I hate careless people. That's why I like you. Now, there is so much going on in that. First of all, Fitzgerald has let us know that there are two instances where Jordan is known to be untruthful, to lie, to serve herself. She has this situation where within her professional career where she has allegedly been involved in a scandal with lying in a tournament, and now this where she's lied about a car that she's borrowed. And then thirdly, the thing about her character is when she almost hits a pedestrian, she feels no responsibility to her actions. She says it takes two to make an accident. And the other thing that I find pretty interesting there is that, and gives me pause, is that he doesn't really hold her accountable because she's a woman. And that's a reflection of him. And that's what I was alluding to. That's part of what I was alluding to in chapter 1 of how much culpability does Nick have in reference to the decisions the people he hangs out with and their choices and actions in life, because he is choosing to hang out with them. Now, Fitzgerald then brings us back into the fold about the morality of Nick as Nick realizes that he is writing letters to a girl back home he's signing Love Nick, and those are misleading. And now that things are getting more serious with Jordan, he has some work that he needs to do in order to be more clear and honest with his intentions, or what his intentions are not. And he feels like he needs to do this before he pursues anything else with Jordan. So there's that. And Fitzgerald concludes the chapter with Nick making an observation and an assessment of himself where he says, I am one of the few honest people I know. We are left to determine if A, this is true, and B, if it is true, is this by Nick's luck or by his own doing? So I hope that that's been a little bit helpful for you, and we will return with another lesson over chapter 4.